Somewhere in an alleyway of a large Chinese city, a man in a red shirt is running away from someone in fear, not realizing why he is being punished. Then he stopped abruptly, trying to listen to the footsteps of his pursuer. Hearing nothing, the man realized that he had broken away from the chase and exhaled relaxedly. Suddenly, a stranger came up from behind and put a knife blade to his throat. The assassin's footsteps were so quiet that even the wind walking through the narrow alley was better heard. Feeling the dagger at his throat, the man in the red shirt asked the stranger to wait and promised to give all the money he had. "Die!" said the murderer indifferently, unwilling to listen to his victim any longer. He then slit his target's throat, thus fulfilling the contract. The next morning, this guy yawning with fatigue is named Shinjo Kai and is 17 years old. He is a high school student and an assassin by occupation. It was this morning that he realized that, after all, it had been a stupid decision to go to school right after his night job. Soon the exhausted boy came to school. Walking up to the office he needed, the guy opened the door and looked inside. Most of his classmates had arrived first and, breaking into groups, were already chatting about their own things. But that didn't bother the boy. He shoved his hands in his pockets and walked leisurely to his desk while the other students looked at him strangely. Approaching Shinjo, student number 35, Mido Shuji, who is the head trump card of the soccer club and also the class president, greeted his classmate in a friendly manner. "Uh-huh," Shinjo Kai emotionlessly replied, taking a seat at his desk. Then the boy simply rested his head on the table and fell asleep, driving his headmen into a stupor with such actions. Poofed, he's as insufferable as ever. Nagasho Reina, student number 22, who was the unspoken leader of the girls in the class, said indignantly. When the girl approached the head teacher, she asked perplexedly why he was still messing around with this guy. Mido awkwardly replied that Shinjo was a classmate of theirs. However, the fact that he came to school and immediately fell asleep means that this boy has no sense of tact at all. At that moment, the classroom door opened and a sturdy guy who looked like a bully appeared on the threshold. Then, with an irritated look at him, Nagasho said that this kid was even worse than Shinjo Kai. This is student number 1, Arashi Shunsky. He is known in the neighborhood as the head of the bullies. Running up to him, two classmates wished good morning to Arashi-san. After saying hello to them too, the bully glanced at the guy sitting in the farthest corner of the office on the last desk. Seeing that this boy was shamelessly sleeping with his head resting on the desk, he tisked unhappily. "Hey you!" Arashi muttered irritably, walking over to his sleeping classmate. But Shinjo just ignored him and continued to sleep soundly. Realizing that he was not being listened to, the angry bully told the guy that if he continued to sleep, he would be in trouble. Unable to bear such insolence, Arashi called out to the boy again and tried to grab him by the scruff of the neck. But suddenly someone grabbed him firmly by the wrist. Looking dumbfounded at Shinjo, the bully asked what the hell was going on. Meanwhile, a guy yawning with fatigue sitting at his desk lifted his head. "Well, what do you want?" "I want to sleep," Shinjo Kai asked coldly, glancing at Arashi. When he felt that he could not move his arm, the irritated bully demanded that he let go of his arm at once. At the same second, Shinji squeezed Arashi's arm with great force, causing a crunch to be heard. I'm sorry, I didn't notice," the sleepy boy said mockingly, finally letting go of the bully's wrist. Abruptly pulling his hand away, Arashi Shunsuke looked at the boy with hatred. "Creepy asshole," he said tensely, kneading the aching wrist of his hand. At the same instant, the number 8 student sitting at a nearby desk, Kanzaki Rin, asked the two of them to be quiet. This girl is the top beauty of the class. She is particularly talented in literature and martial arts, but she keeps a low profile. The bully leader looked at her angrily and asked if she was going to be impertinent. Suddenly, one of his classmates stood in front of the guy, dumbfounded by this sudden movement. Her name is Hashimoto Mirei, and she is student number 29. She is a very strict girl who respects order in everything. That's why she was elected as a member of the disciplinary committee. She jumped down from her chair and asked Arashi to stop before he broke anything. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, knock it off! You're just going to get ignored anyway," said student number 23, sitting indifferently in his desk. That's Narumi Ryu, an easygoing guy, or at least he tries to be. As he listened to the three of them, Arashi was confused about which one of them he wanted to drag more. Shinji, who had fallen asleep behind him again, snored loudly. With a disgruntled chuckle, the angry bully leader sat down at his seat and put his feet on the desk with a clatter. Soon the bell rang for class and all the students settled into their seats. Kanzaki Rin, the class beauty, closed her book while thinking about something. Kagura High School. First grade, second year of school. In this class, such conflict scenes are a daily routine. Thinking about it, Shinji Kai finally fell into slumber. After a while, he opened his eyes, feeling something strange. Did Mido, the head of the class, have something underfoot? What the hell is that? Is this some kind of portal? After noticing a strange phenomenon under their feet, all the students in the class went into a panic. They didn't realize what was happening. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Meanwhile, the unknown portal had already taken up space in the auditorium. What the hell is that? The puzzled headman asked, looking at the floor in surprise. Realizing that this was not the time to think about it at the moment, Mido glanced at his classmates and advised everyone to leave the classroom now. But it wasn't until Shinji realized that they simply wouldn't make it in time. It's late. There's no more time left. At the same second, there was a bright flash, blinding everyone in the office. In a moment, all the students were in a large stone room with antique columns and a large door. Lifting up from the cold floor, Shinji immediately tried to figure out what this place was. A building made of stone and huge columns as fortifications. The boy had only one explanation for it. As hard as it was to believe, he and all of his classmates were swallowed up by this white light, and then the entire class was moved somewhere. While the boy was thinking about it, the rest of the high school students also woke up. Looking around, each of them couldn't understand what this white light was and where they had all gotten to. The headman then asked everyone to calm down. He didn't know what had happened either, but first of all, Mido would want to make sure that no one was hurt. Smiling contentedly, Shinji mentally noted that the headman had made a pretty good move. He was able to calm even those who were one step away from panic. However, there was one among the classmates who disagreed with Mido. Arashi glanced at the headman and said that there was no point in wasting time. The bully thought that if this guy wasn't going to deal with the situation, there was nothing to talk to him about. Arashi turned around and headed for the door, ordering his subordinates to follow him. On the one hand, the kid is right. But even as he realized that, Shinji asked Arashi to wait a bit. When the head of the hooligans turned around and asked the boy what he wanted, he told him that he could hear footsteps outside the door. Someone's coming this way. Dumbfounded, Arashi turned around and looked tensely at the exit of the room and wondered if it was true. That's right. There can be no mistake. There's at least two of them. A man and a woman. The only question is what they want and with what intentions they walk into that room now. The door opened and an elderly man in a cloak and a gray-haired woman stepped inside, which is to be expected of hero candidates. You've managed to keep your composure. The girl entered, giving a friendly smile. The high school students looked at her in surprise and couldn't believe that she was standing in front of them. But what is she wearing? Cosplay? In fact, these two look like a knight and a princess from the Middle Ages. Plus, she said something about heroes. What could it mean? Hiding behind one of the pillars, Shinji Kai noticed that the man with the sword was well built physically, and the wary atmosphere around him. He's strong, and this isn't just a cosplay. As for the girl, she's had some training, but nothing remarkable. It is a pleasure to meet you. My name is Leonora, and I am the Archbishop of the sacred land of Digrest, and next to me is my knight Gale. The girl introduced herself, looking at the chosen heroes. Irritated, Arashi pointed his finger at her and asked her what the hell she was talking about. This kid had never heard of such a country in his life. In turn, the gray-haired woman explained that it was no bullshit, but she could understand the guy's point of view. Mido apologized to the strangers and told them that they had no idea how they'd gotten here, so they were a little confused. Then he asked them to tell him what was going on. Leonora, of course, did not refuse the boy's request. As a matter of fact, that was why she had come here. The simplest way to describe your situation is this, the girl pronounced, glancing at the high school students. You have been summoned to another world. For you are the hope of mankind that can overthrow the Demon King. You are the candidates for heroes. While Mido scratched the back of his head and said that the girl's story was hard to believe, a bully standing nearby asked the stranger to stop talking about some incomprehensible nonsense. With an angry glance at the insolent boy, the elderly knight advised him to choose his expressions. He was facing the saint of this country, after all. In turn, an angry Arashi told the old man to shut up, and then promised to kill him if he continued to show off. You seem to understand your place only after you know pain, Nightingale said, gripping the hilt of his sword. But when Leonora asked him to stop, the older man immediately refused. The knight explained that even if the kid didn't understand much, it would be better if he could rein him in now. All right then, die, old man! Arashi shouted angrily as he ran up to Gale. Shinji realized that this guy was brave enough to challenge the man with the sword. Arashi Shunsuke is used to fighting against opponents with weapons. The key is to dodge the first blow and strike from below. He finds it even more comfortable to fight with his bare hands. But in the next second, as the enemy pulled the blade from its sheath, the lad realized how badly he had been wrong. Arashi didn't even notice the movement of the sword, but his forehead was already wounded and bleeding. That's when Gale explained that he had only intentionally messed up his skin now. After that, he asked the boy if he would continue. Leonora, on the other hand, told her loyal knight that this was enough, after which she asked him to put his sword away. I apologize for the rude welcome. We never meant you any harm, Leonora began to say, looking at the guests of this world. The reason why you are in this world I will explain to you now, right down to the smallest detail. So first of all, please observe silence. In this world, humanity is currently experiencing a Demon King invasion and is on the verge of extinction. Our sacred country of Digrest also continues the resistance. But we are not fully capable of resisting the invaders. After listening to the Archbishop, Shinji remarked that the story of the Demon King was rather strange. Meanwhile, Leonora concluded her monologue by saying that for all of humanity, the teenagers who had come here from another world were candidates for heroes and the last hope. In other words, we have to defeat the Demon King? Mido clarified dumbfoundedly, glancing at the gray-haired girl. Then, smiling nervously, Narumi Ryuya said that was impossible. None of the people here have even fought once. Even more than that, not everyone is able to simply endure this situation. Looking at the seniors, Gale explained that, whatever it was, they would have to do it. Besides, the only way for them to return to their world is to defeat the Demon King. Petrified with fear, the teens looked at the knight, not wanting to believe what they were hearing. Shinji himself doesn't know if what the old man just said was a lie, but it looks like Gale is trying to prepare the boys' classmates for the worst. Although, even if they accept the situation, people who have lived carefree days are not going to go on a killing spree out of the blue. It takes experience, and especially talent. You called us here to save your asses, and you don't give a damn what we think. Arashi, bleeding with blood, suddenly said angrily. Did these two really think that those who came from the other world would silently obey and indulge them? What are you staring at? You're annoying me! Hearing this, Nightingale realized that even after an absolute defeat, this fellow had not lost his fighting spirit. He was indeed a promising fighter. It may become a serious threat in the future. Therefore, you should get rid of it right now. But just as Gale thought of this, the Archbishop stepped in front of him, and uttering the words, "Grant me healing," began to treat the wound on the bully's forehead. It only took a couple seconds and the wound healed. The girl then confessed that they were guilty before the children for having brought them here. With a sigh, Leonora asked the chosen heroes to forgive her for all her sins. Standing aside, a surprised Nagase asked the Archbishop what that light was. Then the gray-haired woman explained that it was the power of sorcery. She used the miraculous power granted to her by the god Digrest. This temporarily brings a new law into the world, and as Leonora suggests, it's better known to the inhabitants of the other world as magic. From her words, Shinji, hiding behind the pillar, realized that this girl and apparently the others knew the culture of the other world. Was this not their first call? Meanwhile, the Archbishop had already headed towards the class headman. This power is the main reason you are here, the girl explained, touching Mido's head with her hand. In the same instant, the guy felt as if his blood in his veins had frozen abruptly and his whole being began to change. Covering her face with her hand from the blinding light that suddenly appeared in her classmates' palms, Nagase noticed Mido Shuji's hands sparkling. And at the same moment, the light in his hand became a sword. The Archbishop, however, explained that her miraculous power could awaken the power of blessing in hero candidates. The power is given randomly, and the girl cannot change it. Leonora realizes how self-serving her request is, yet she asks the teenagers to lend their strength to the country. But the headman in turn replied that it didn't matter how much strength the Archbishop gave them. It wouldn't make ordinary high school students fight better. With her head bowed, the gray-haired girl said that she understood that visitors to this world would have to go through rigorous training. And of course, the country of Digrest promises that it will take full care of the candidates. After listening to her, Mido didn't hesitate long and agreed. Guys, listen up! For the sake of our own survival, we need defense and knowledge first and foremost right now, shouted the headmaster, addressing his classmates. In an emergency, a blessing could save them. So why don't teenagers listen to these two people? After listening to Mido, all the classmates realized that this was the only way out and immediately agreed. When Leonora heard their decision, she smiled and thanked the children. Then she asked to be allowed to give them God's blessing. Hashimoto Mirai received the blessing of telekinesis. The blessing of the explosion went to Arashi Shinjo. Following them, the rest of the class received their abilities as well. Did everyone get their gift? The Archbishop asked awkwardly, noticing that the children had already started having fun with their new superpowers. Stepping out from behind the pillar, Shinjo Kai raised his hand and said that he still hadn't received his blessing. When the guy came up to Leonora, the girl apologized to him and said that she hadn't noticed him. After these words, she put her hand on the boy's shoulder. At the same moment, Shinjo felt that something was wrong with his vision. As he looked at the Archbishop standing before him, the guy saw the system window in front of her face. This girl's name is Leonora Digrest, and she is 18 years old. It also stated that her attack is equal to A rank, defense and dexterity to D. Physical strength only reaches the level of E, but as for magic power, it is at its highest rank of S. On top of all this, the boy saw Leonora's skills and their levels. While the boy was trying to figure out what had happened to his vision, the Archbishop explained that apparently he had gotten the blessing of an appraisal. This is a great rarity. The boy looked at her with a puzzled look and asked what score meant. The girl told him that it could be used to find out details about the strength and skills of the target. Realizing the essence of his newfound power, Shinjo decided to try something. He looked at his palm and activated the blessing. The system immediately popped up a statistics window in front of his eyes. Shinjo Kai, 17 years old. Attack, B, defense, F dexterity, B physical strength, C magical strength, E. On top of that, the guy had several useful skills pumped up to level 5. Among them were killing technique, short sword wielding, throwing technique, and stealth. After studying his characteristics a bit, the boy finally realized that everything he needed was displayed in this window. It looks like a game window. It was also quite simple to understand. But the moment the unsuspecting lad was looking out the system window, behind him, he sensed danger approaching. At the same second, Arashi pounced on him, using his blast blessing. Shinjo immediately dodged the blow, and the bully in turn used his fist to smash through the stone floor where the boy had recently stood. Straightening up, the enemy left a huge dent in the ground beneath him. "What do you think? I've got the power of the explosion. How about you?" Arashi asked mockingly, looking haughtily at his hated classmate. Afterward, he mockingly remarked that the guy could do nothing else but make his eyes red. Most of the classmates supported the bully and laughed at Shinjo's worthless power too. Looking at the boy, Nagasho agreed with the others' opinions on him. He always acts so arrogant, it even pleased her to see him get crapped on. Meanwhile, looking at his classmates indifferently, Shinjo Kai couldn't understand why they had become so confident. From the information he had received, he couldn't tell exactly how useful these blessings were. This power has been lent to them, and no one knows when they'll decide to take it back. Still, there are plenty of ways to kill someone without a blessing. As Leonora approached the hero candidates, she noticed that each of them now had their own blessing. She realizes that it's hard for the children to control, but one day, their gifts will become the fangs that will pierce the Demon King. After saying that, the Archbishop clapped her hands and said that the guests from the other world seemed to be tired. Therefore, they should have a good rest today. By evening, each of the students who had become hero candidates were taken and assigned to a different room. Before going to bed, Shinjo Kai went out the window and decided to gather more information about what was going on here. 2 guards were walking within the walls of the fortress where the arrivals from the other world were sleeping. One of them was complaining to his superiors for sending him on patrol in the night. But his partner explained that the hero candidates had been brought in today, so there was nothing they could do about it. Then, the still angry knight wondered if these hero candidates could even defend themselves. He'd seen a glimpse of them. They're children. I doubt they even know how to hold a sword. Keep walking with the torch in his hand, the man expressed concern that he didn't believe these guys could defeat the Demon King. It's crazy. His partner reminded him that this is the job of a saint. She must have some kind of plan. This conversation between the 2 patrolmen was overheard by Shinjo hiding behind a tree. This is the 3rd patrol in quite some time. According to the knights, it's clear that the guards have been beefed up. Deciding that this was the perfect opportunity to test his new power, the lad used the blessing of appraisal on one of the guards. At the same moment, the boy realized something interesting. The man he had just scanned only had a level 1 swordsmanship skill. If this guard had miraculous powers, Shinjo might have gotten caught. However, not everyone seems to have it. Running out from behind the tree, the boy decided to change his location to get a better look at the place he and his classmates were in. In fact, he roughly understood the geography around the castle. It's a typical fortress town. 2 guards stand at the main gate of the fortress and guard the entrance. Hiding behind a bush nearby, Shinjo wondered what the situation was like inside the castle. How hard would it be to sneak in while they had reinforced guards? Despite the fact that he was indeed very much interested, the guy decided to take his time and call it a day. Suddenly, he noticed 3 female classmates standing nearby in a field. Asking her friends in a trembling voice if they were really allowed to do this, the worried girl with dark hair pointed out that the guards could spot them at any time. Looking at her confidently, the blonde wondered if she was afraid. They'll just practice the blessing, that's all. At the very least, they could blame it on Hashimoto. Looking thoughtfully at the flames created with her finger, Nagasho Rina explained that she wouldn't be able to sleep anyway. At least it would be good for her. After these words, the 3 girls began to study the workings of the power bestowed upon them today. The Shinjo Kai sitting behind a rock was watching all of this unnoticed. God's blessing, huh? All of this makes the guy uneasy, so he decided that the best option now would be to watch these girls for a while. But at the same instant, the boy felt something strange. Dazedly turning around, he realized that some unknown creature was approaching here. The classmates standing in the field also heard a strange sound somewhere in the thicket of tall grass. Scared, the girls looked there for a while, trying to figure out what kind of creature was hiding from them. It wasn't human, judging by the sounds it was making. Suddenly, a lizard-like monster jumped out of the tall grass and looked at the high school girls. Seeing this terrible monster, the girls screamed in terror. Shinjo Kai had never seen a beast like this before. It really looks like a lizard. At the same moment, the guy decided to scan the assessments of the unexpectedly appeared opponent with his blessing. The name of this creature is Lizard Val. Apparently, however, it is not a name, but the name of its species. Be that as it may, it doesn't matter right now. If you study his stats better, you'll notice that this monster's status is sudden. He gained this status due to stunning the girls. While the boy was trying to figure out what he should do with this information, the lizard raised his head and breathed air into his lungs. The very next second, a deafening scream from the monster rang out. After realizing that the creature was aggressive, the 3 girls rushed to run away from it. They immediately ran into the tall grass to try to hide there from the monster running after them. Shinjo, who was watching from the side, noticed that the lizard is a real brawler. He attacked the humans without a second thought. It moves fast on all 4s, but linearly. And this monster doesn't seem to have much intelligence. It looks big, but if you use a knife, it's easy to kill. Just thinking about it, Shinjo Kai, who had climbed to the top of the rock, took out a knife from his sleeve and immediately threw that at the lizard. The blade of the dagger flew a few meters and embedded itself into the thick scales of the enemy. The perplexed monster returned to the rock from which the knife had come, but saw no one there. Shinjo, on the other hand, had long ago hidden behind another hiding place. His plan had worked, but it wasn't very deep early on. Still not realizing where the dagger came from, the lizard once again rushed after the boy's classmates. At that instant, one of them tripped over a small rock lying on the grass. Nagasho Reina fell face first into the ground. Turning around to look at her, one of her friends decided to help her. But grabbing Chanami's sleeve, the other girl shouted that there was no time for that. And when Rina lifted herself off the ground, holding her aching cheek, an enraged Val lizard was already standing behind her. Realizing the danger she was now in, the girl turned around frightened at the monster. The creature stared mercilessly at its victim, preparing to tear it to pieces. That's when Rina realized she was finished. There was no way she was going to make it out of here in time. The monster swung a paw to tear the girl apart, while her friend stood by helplessly and just watched, unable to do anything to help. Covering her head with her hands in despair, Rina cried out in fear. However, when she opened her eyes, the girl saw that the lizard was lying dead in front of her, with a bloody throwing knife sticking out of its body. This dagger struck the monster's head with astonishing accuracy, hitting a vital point. Realizing that the danger was over, her friends immediately ran up to a frightened Renee and asked if she was okay. But the girl was no longer listening to them. She was trying to understand what had happened. Had someone saved her? The classmates helped their friend to her feet and immediately suggested that they get out of here as soon as possible. They didn't want to run into another creature. Meanwhile, standing behind the tree, Shinjo Kai heard the 3 leave. There was no particular reason to kill the lizard, but if the guy just left, who wouldn't be able to sleep properly? As he approached the creature's corpse, the boy pulled the knife from its head and wondered, did such monsters roam everywhere in this world? It looked like the boy wouldn't be able to walk around much today. At the same moment, Shinjo felt something strange again. Since he had no idea what to expect from the next danger, the guy made the decision to hide behind the lizard's corpse. There was a suspicious silence, and the only thing that stood out in the landscape was the very rock on which the boy had thrown his first knife. Carefully peeking out from behind the monster's body, Shinjo began to observe this strange stone. There was absolutely someone out there. Thinking about it, he realized that he had to get out of here before the creature behind that rock noticed him. At the same instant, the boy seemed to vanish. Running from cover to cover, he fled from the scene. After a while, an unknown man in a black cloak came out from behind a rock. Approaching the dead lizard, he crushed its head with one foot. The hero candidates are just minor sleuths. I'm even disappointed. The man in the cloak covered in monster blood said aloud. But there is one with a similar odor, the stranger added contentedly, licking the blood off his cheek. In one of the castle's rooms, the corpse of a long-dead monster with its head split open lies on the stone floor. Upon seeing this terrifying sight, the high school students were petrified. While the blonde guy was examining the creature's body, Gale told the children that the monster had been loitering near the walls of the capital last night. After listening to him, Mido looked at the lizard corpse puzzled. Standing nearby, Arashi also looked at the monster and hesitated. At this moment, after hearing what the Archbishop's personal knight said, one of the classmates asked where the monster came from. Gale explained that the monsters are minions of the Demon King and they like to eat human flesh. Now the hero candidates would be their prime targets. Turning to the blonde guy with glasses sitting by the corpse, the old man called him steady and asked if he'd found out anything. Pulling his bloody fingers out of the monster's body, the blonde told him that there were traces of sorcery. It was definitely the work of a mid-level demon, if not higher. Perhaps a rumor of hero candidates reached them, and they decided to scout the situation. Hearing the word sorcery, Shinjo noticed that it was something new. It was clearly different from the miraculous power that Leonora had bestowed. Walking up to Steady, still studying the lizard's body, the class headman asked if this monster was controlled by a demon. Straightening up, the blonde was surprised that the guy had guessed so quickly, after which he remarked that he was indeed correct in his thinking. Strong demons are able to control monsters. To do so, they use a technique called slave sorcery. First, monsters are plants and animals mutated with mana. They are categorized by ferocity and strength, and only a living organism can become a monster. The main source of their mana is evil. In other words, the Demon King is the source of their life. It makes sense that he and his minions are able to control the monsters. Noticing that Steady was talking too much, Gale told him to stop, then added that it was time for them to leave. The boy disagreed, shouting that he hadn't explained everything yet. I still have so much to learn, don't I? The blonde wailed in despair, as the Archbishop's personal knight grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and dragged him behind him. Shinju Kai realized that this researcher could be used to gather information in the future. But the main problem now is what drove this thing lying on the ground. That time when Shinjo watched the monster running after the girls, the lizard's status changed to submission. Po means that at that moment the guy sensed the presence of a demon behind that tall rock. He's quite skilled. It's a miracle the boy managed to spot him. Maybe he's still around. Suddenly, Shinjo felt a strange aura behind him. It felt like someone was watching him. So scared of imminent death? Don't be afraid. Out of nowhere came a voice in my head. When the voice died down, the boy was still in a stupor for a while, trying to figure out what it was. He couldn't say for sure if it was real or if he'd just heard it. It was just a feeling, but not something obvious. But was it? While the boy was puzzled, Arashi approached the elderly knight and explained to his classmates that their goal was to defeat the Demon King. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to return home. That was why he wasn't going to stay here for long. Noting that he was right for once, the class beauty and the head teacher agreed with his decision. Right. If they wanted to go home, there was no other choice. However, not everyone is so determined. Some of them are simply unable to fight monsters. They're terrified at the mere thought of it. Looking at his classmates, Shinjo noticed that they were too bold because this world was like a game. But the fact that they were in a different world didn't change the essence of war. Killing would still be necessary. They better realize that soon. Meanwhile, the Archbishop entered the room and asked the children not to hurry so much. The girl explained that they hadn't yet realized the full extent of their new powers. Teenagers need to go through training first. Regardless, the people of Digrest have summoned them to this world as hero candidates. The speed of progress of those arriving from another world is different from that of the local inhabitants. And now it's been a full week since I started my intense workouts. Sitting in the fortress library, Shinjo tried to read one of the books. However, as expected, he couldn't understand a word of what was written there. If you think about it, it's strange that people from different worlds can communicate freely with each other without language barriers. Pulling his attention away from the book, the boy looked out the window thoughtfully to see how the others were doing. Outside, all of his classmates were practicing with swords and magic, splitting into groups. Shinjo's inherited appraisal is not the most suitable blessing for combat. He was forbidden from training, but was given access to the library. Knowledge is also power, isn't it? Leonora said with a smile. And of course, in all classmates, this phrase, to put it mildly, laughed. Despite the fact that the guy can understand absolutely nothing in these manuscripts, one thing has come to his attention. There seems to be only one history of the country in this library. Surprisingly, not a single book says anything about demons. Once outside, the boy continued to watch the high school students practice. Leonora really didn't lie. They are developing by the hour, not by the day. And there are 5 of the best among them. Narumi, able to shatter anything with the power of wind with just his fingers, and Arashi with his blessing of explosion. Kanzaki with the power of control. Hashimoto, who can move large objects with her telekinesis. She is also Nagashorina, who has become an excellent ranged mage thanks to her pyrokinesis. Besides, there is one man who has surpassed them all. There was an annoyed shout, and the steel sword knocked out of his hands flew high into the air. After a while, he fell and stabbed his blade into the ground. Looking at his blade, the disarmed knight immediately gave up, noting that it was amazing that this guy was already stronger than him. And that guy was Mido Shuji, the head of the class. Lowering his sword, the boy said that he only achieved such results because of his teacher's instruction, and he was truly grateful to him for that. While the guy was chatting with his coach, Shinjo, standing nearby, decided to scan his stats. Just a week ago, Mido's numbers were all around D and F. Now everything has changed drastically. Attack, agility, magic power. All of these items have increased to A rank. The remaining defense and physical strength have also risen a lot. All the way up to B. Even if Mido is a genius, this is just an unimaginable leap. Does God's blessing not only give the ability, but also affect the bodies of the owners? Soon, some of the students in the class finished practicing and headed towards Shinjo standing against the wall nearby, chatting with each other. When some of his classmates came up to him, they started pestering him with questions about what he was doing at the training ground if he couldn't fight. Let him sit quietly and read his textbooks. Here they go again. The boy thought indifferently as he looked at them. Aside from Arashi and his subordinates, the others had also begun to look down on Shinjo. Apparently, this is a result of the growth of their forces. Don't ignore me. We're friends, aren't we? One of the classmates said haughtily, holding out his hand to the boy. At the same moment, something pushed his ankle hard, and the student trying to bully was knocked off his feet. The last thing he had time to see before his head hit the ground was Shinjo putting his foot forward. What's wrong with you? Did you fall down on the ground? Did you hurt yourself? The boy asked, looking at his suddenly fallen classmate. Everyone else just stared dumbly at their stupid friend, who had folded up ridiculously in the fall. But when a classmate decided to take revenge on Shinjo, Arashi told her to get behind him and warned her that she was coming. At the same second, Leonora and her personal knight came out to the range. As she passed by Shinjo, she smiled at him and all those standing nearby. Noticing the Archbishop with guile, all the hero candidates stopped their training and their coach sat down on his knee in front of the girl. Thank you for your attention, Leonora said in a friendly tone, looking at everyone here. Turning to the children, she remarked that they had all made remarkable progress. Even the Archbishop had not expected such rapid progress. That was why she had decided to accelerate the schedule. With a wary glance at the Archbishop, Narumi Ryuya asked what she meant by accelerating the schedule. Did the girl really want to send them all after the Demon King's head right now? Why, I wouldn't ask you to do such a thing. The tasks are much simpler. It's time for you to sit down in a real battle with a monster, Leonora explained, closing her eyes. Hearing this, everyone tensely looked at the gray-haired girl. Monster fight. Is it too soon for only 1 week of training? Soon, the whole class, together with Gale and his mistress, went to the forest. The knight told the children that today was the day for practice and that it would take place here. Moving in a large group will not work as it will only get in the way. Therefore, the hero candidates will be divided into teams of 2 or 3. When Nagasho heard this condition, she immediately called Shuji to join her team. The blonde girl standing next to her also asked to join the team. Since some of Arashi's entourage knew that this guy could take out any monster they met, they immediately asked to join his team. The head of the bullies didn't object and told them to do whatever they wanted. The classmates continued to divide among themselves. Soon, all the teams were formed. Noticing that all the students were divided into squads, Gale was ready to begin the test. But suddenly, he noticed something strange. There were still 2 hero candidates left, standing with their backs to each other and seemingly not going to team up with anyone. Closing her eyes frustratedly, Kanzaki explained to Gale that for some reason, no one had invited her to the group. In fact, it was her own fault. At school, she interacted with everyone coldly and did not like company. That's why her classmates are afraid to approach her. Turning around to the guy behind her, the girl remarked that she had no choice but to team up with him, and then asked Shinjo if he was okay with it. The boy didn't refuse and told her to do as she pleased. Kanzaki Rin, self-confident and cold-blooded. She acts very proudly, not letting anyone get in her way. Feeling Shinjo's gaze on her, the girl turned to look at him. Looking at the guy perplexed, the girl asked why he was looking at her like that. Turning away, the hooded classmate told her not to worry and to forget about it. Meanwhile, the Archbishop explained the conditions of the challenge. The team that defeated the most monsters would receive a special reward. After that, the gray-haired girl wished everyone good luck and announced the start of practice. A few minutes later, Shinjo and Kanzaki silently and leisurely walk alone through the forest, searching for the right monster. I'll tell you right away, my blessing is better than any of our classmates, so you don't even have to do anything. Just stay out of the way. The girl suddenly spoke out, looking at her teammate. The guy didn't contradict her and replied that in that case he was now relying only on her. Fixing her hair, the classmate remarked that this boy had no pride at all. In turn, Shinjo, looking at her back, decided to look at this girl's fighting potential first. Continuing to follow Kanzaki, the guy sensed 4 signals around him at once. Apparently, the monsters had decided to surround them. At the same moment, a small goblin with a club came out from behind the bushes. Seeing the monster in front of her, Kanzaki stopped abruptly, and Shinjo, who was following her, began to watch what his classmate would do. Without a second's hesitation, the goblin pounced on the girl, swinging his wooden club. "Fall down!" Kanzaki shouted, stretching her arm forward and activating her blessing. The monster, who had no time to do anything, was immediately pinned firmly to the ground without a single chance to move. While the classmate straightened up her opponent, Shinjo watched her strength carefully. This is Kanzaki's blessing of control, the power to make others do her bidding. Continuing to stand still, the guy warned the girl that there were more monsters around. Hearing this, Kanzaki immediately ordered the opponent under her blessing to drop their weapons. Then, by the same method, she demanded that the goblin put his hands behind his back. Glancing at the girl, Shinjo wondered what was going on with her. She looked rather tired. The classmate explained that if you used the blessing for too long, it was very exhausting. Realizing that the energy consumption was colossally high, the guy turned around and advised Kanzaki to quickly kill this monster before the others pulled up. Looking at the tearing goblin, the girl asked how he could be killed. "He's so much like a human. So what of it? He attacked us, remember? They're our enemies. Leaving them alive makes no sense," the boy explained, glaring coldly at his classmate. Slightly stammering, Kanzaki agreed with the guy and said she understood him. Picking up a small rock from the ground, Shinjo realized that this girl would not make it. Even with her powers, she's still just a confused schoolgirl. Well, the important thing is that she makes the right decision when the danger comes. While the guy was calmly tossing the stone in his hand, the other monsters had already come out of hiding, preparing to attack their enemies. The goblins began to close in on the hero candidates, and Kanzaki, he in turn continued to keep his only opponent immobilized. Shinjo immediately informed his classmate that the monsters were out. "Fall down!" The heavily tired girl shrieked again, applying her control blessing on the other monsters. At that very second, she started to get a lot of panting. Continuing to look at all of this and do nothing, Shinjo asked her classmate what she was going to do next. The girl, on the other hand, told the guy to shut up and asked him to help, not to stand still. However, the boy reminded her that she herself had told him to stay out of the way. After a bit of silence, Kanzaki realized what her classmate wanted her to do. He wants her to kill those monsters. Realizing that she had no other choice, the main beauty of the class waved her hand and ordered the monsters to wring their necks. Clutching their heads, the goblins began to shake with fear. A moment later, all four opponents played chop suey on the violin, performing a beautiful symphony. And it was the first time Kanzaki had ever seen death with her own eyes. Can one really be forced to do such a thing? Shinjo asked in surprise, looking at the goblin corpses. The girl confirmed this, noting that it might not work for everyone. The stronger the opponent, the less chance of success. To tell you the truth, getting involved in real combat and seeing dead bodies. That's not how I envisioned it, Kanzaki said, looking at the dead monster bodies with pity. Calming down his classmate, the boy reminded her that these goblins attacked themselves. In other words, they're the enemy. The enemy must be killed, no matter if it's a monster or a human. You have to kill if you want to stay alive. The girl looked at the boy in surprise and asked why he was so calm. He didn't even have any strength. Noting that there wasn't much to eat, the guy examining the corpse explained to his classmate that he wasn't scary, and that was one of his strengths. Then, turning back to Kanzaki, the boy inquired as to what she would do. Move on? If she was afraid, the two of them could safely return. After pondering his words once more, the girl looked thoughtfully at the corpses of the decapitated monsters. Turning around, she proudly replied that they weren't going back to anywhere. The classmate then beckoned Shinjo to follow, adding that they were moving on. Now this girl is stubborn, but she has a stable psyche. You can work with that. By the way, I wonder how the rest of you are doing. Narumi Ryuya, running away from the unknown creature, looked dumbfounded at the monster and asked the girl running beside him what to do about it. Hashimoto asked the boy not to ask her about it, and then told him that she had heard that the monsters here were weak. "Shit!" cried out the boy hopelessly, stopping abruptly. Together with Hashimoto, they decided to put everything on the line and try to use their blessings to try and deal with the enemy. Narumi immediately used his wind power, combining it with his classmate's telekinesis to lift the stone. Casting a joint spell, the two launched a huge rock at the monster, like a projectile from a cannon. As it flew into the creature, the boulder shattered into small pieces. But the monster itself was unharmed. This stone did not damage it at all, as the enemy has very strong armored scales. As they fell to the ground, Narumi Ryu finally realized the predicament they had gotten themselves into. How the hell do you deal with a monster like that? Just recently, Kanzaki had promised herself that she would definitely return to her world. She had been raised by her grandfather since birth, and she still hadn't paid him back. This girl had dreamed of making him happy after all, and she's sure her sudden disappearance is making her grandfather very sad. Following her classmate leisurely, Shinju Kong wondered how long she was going to go in a straight line. It wouldn't take long to get lost. The girl replied that as long as they walked straight ahead, they wouldn't get lost. If you really believe that, you obviously haven't been in the woods much, the boy objected, looking up as he continued to follow her. Irritated, Kanzaki turned on him and asked the boy to be quiet. But it wasn't until she looked at Shinjo that she realized something. Just a little while ago, he was acting so terrifyingly, but now he was rather calm. What's that guy all about? Noticing the girl's gaze on him, the boy asked what was wrong. Did he really have something on his face? Turning away, the classmate simply asked him to ignore it. At the same moment, the two men heard a scream. Kanzaki immediately recognized Hashimoto's voice. Noticing that it looked like she was into something, Shinjo asked his partner how they would proceed. Of course we'll help. I hope she's not hurt, Kanzaki replied, heading in the direction of the screams. Taking a look at the girl, the guy noticed that she was surprisingly genteel. With a perplexed look at her comrade, the classmate asked what he had thought of her before. But realizing that it didn't matter now, she suggested hurrying up. Somewhere nearby in the woods, the sound of a bang was heard. The battered Hashimoto, having missed another blow from her opponent, fell to the ground without strength. With a concerned look at his partner, Narumi Ryuya asked if she was all right. "It's okay, run away." In an exhausted voice, the girl said, looking at the guy. Running up to his classmate, the green-haired boy put his hand on her shoulder and shouted that he wouldn't run away, leaving her here to die. But at the same moment, he heard the furious roar of a monster behind him. Running up to its victims, the armored bear thrust its arm upward, preparing to smash them to the ground. "Monster, stop!" A woman's voice suddenly came from somewhere behind the trees, causing the creature's fist to stop. The girl who saved them at the last moment turned out to be Kanzaki with her blessing of control. While Narumi thanked his savior, the girl warned him that things were bad. He wouldn't be able to hold this monster for long. Watching his classmate's blessing, Shinjo noticed that her power did have different effects on different opponents. Glancing at Narumi, the boy wondered if Hashimoto was alive. Looking worriedly at his classmate, the green-haired boy told him that the girl's wounds were serious, but she was still breathing. Then grab her and run away from here, Shinjo advised after hearing the terrible state Hashimoto was in now. Throwing a perplexed look at the boy, Narumi replied that there was no way he would run away from here and fight them. Then, Shinjo asked the green-haired boy if he was going to leave the injured Hashimoto to slowly die here. Apologizing to his classmates who came to their rescue, Narumi grabbed the tortured girl and told his rescuers that he now owed them. Before the boy ran off, Shinjo asked him to send Mido or Leonora here if he met them. Soon, Kanzaki and her partner were alone with the armored monster. This problem is quite dangerous even for an experienced assassin like Shinjo. That's why the guy decided to run the assessment of the enemy first, while he was immobilized by his partner's blessing. This creature is called an armored mutant bear. All of the stats are pretty high, but one that stands out among them is defense, which equates to A rank. The stats are really serious, especially the defense. Apparently, this bear has a tough coat. There's no way even Shinjo can break through that. Plus, this monster's name states that it's a mutant. What could that mean? At that moment, Kanzaki cried out that she could no longer keep her blessing activated. The control from his opponent immediately slipped, and the bear, sensing that he was free, raised his paws upward, preparing to strike at the two seniors. In the same second, Shinjo Kong informed his partner that they had gained enough time, and so it was time to run away. The main beauty of the class was happy to hear this, and so she immediately agreed with him, as suddenly she fell to her knees exhaustedly, unable to rise any further. After apologizing to the guy, the girl explained that she had spent too much energy using the control blessing, and so her legs no longer held her. While Kanzaki was saying this, the monster had already moved closer to finish off the exhausted victim. That's when Shinjo realized that things were bad. However, he had a trump card up his sleeve for just such a moment. Pulling out a smoke grenade from behind his back, he pulled the pin and threw it at the enemy. In the same instant, thick smoke filled the immediate surroundings of the forest, reducing the visibility of the armored mutant bear. Soon, Shinjo had already run far away, hiding behind a tall tree. Naturally, he didn't forget to bring Kanzaki with him as well. The boy then cautioned the girl to refrain from asking questions until they had finally escaped this monster. After a while, the smoke from the grenade cleared, and the bear finally lost its victims. Glancing puzzled at the boy standing next to her, Kanzaki wondered what it was. As he continued to watch the monster, the guy explained that it was a simple smoke bomb. After that, he said that he made it out of boredom while the others were practicing. Of course, it was a lie. Shinjo-kan is always at least minimally armed, so he came into this world with his weapons as well. But unfortunately, the guy's supplies are limited, so he wouldn't really want to waste it unnecessarily. It's only natural for an assassin to carry a weapon. While the boy was musing about it, Kanzaki apologized to him. Not understanding what she meant, the guy asked what was wrong. "Well, I'm the one who said we'd help them, and ended up saving me," the girl excitedly explained. Shinjo, on the other hand, replied that her apology wasn't necessary. If she felt like it, she could just say thank you. "Okay, thanks," Kanzaki said embarrassedly, looking at the guy. Accepting this gratitude, the boy mockingly remarked that if his partner were always so polite, people would be drawn to her in droves. But when the girl almost shrieked in outrage, Shinjo reminded her to be quiet. The monster was still around after all. Looking out from behind the tree, Kanzaki asked her comrade what they should do in such a situation. Maybe they should run as fast as they could, but the boy, also watching the bear, said there was no need. The moment the guy said that, the monster abruptly calmed down. Sensing the approaching danger, the armored mutant bear turned around. "You're the one who injured Narumi and Hashimoto? I'm your opponent now." Mido stepped out from behind the trees, looking confidently at his opponent. In the same second, the class headman activated his blessing called the Sword that protects against evil. A tense battle is about to be fought between a high-ranking monster and the best hero among the class, who has moved to digress from another world. Pulling out his sword, Mido pointed it at his opponent and assumed a steady fighting stance. Snapping out of his seat, the boy brought his blade behind his back with a shout, preparing to strike a sprawling blow at the monster. The mutant bear in turn did not stand still either, and with a deafening roar pounced on the armed boy. The class headman had no trouble dodging the enemy's attack, and then grabbing the sword firmly by the hilt with both hands, he lunged back. At the same instant, the sharp blade of the evil defending sword cut through the tough skin of the armored bear. However, even though Mido was able to land one of his best blows on his opponent, the wound inflicted was not very deep. Tensely looking at the creature, the boy realized that it was much more durable than it seemed at first glance. "Shuji, to the side!" Reina, who had extended her arms, suddenly shrieked, using her pyrokinesis on the enemy. A huge fireball immediately flew out of her palm, straight into the armored mutant bear's face. At the same moment, the hot flames set the enemy's entire body on fire, burning his tough skin. Looking confidently at the burning monster, the self-assured girl remarked that she knew it wouldn't stand up to it. After stepping back to a safe distance, the class elder praised Rina, then prepared to attack the weakened enemy. But to the surprise of everyone here, the monster recovered quite quickly from such a powerful fire attack. Glaring angrily at the guy in front of him, the armored bear roared loudly. Dazedly looking at it, Rina worriedly asked how this creature was able to resist. Mido, in turn, without taking his eyes off his opponent, asked his partner to remain calm. Then, noticing that the monster had slowed down, he explained to the girl that her attack had worked. And the three of them, if they take their time, they can beat that bear. "Good, that's right," agreed with their commander, the girl standing behind them. Immediately after that, the three of them began to attack the monster simultaneously, not giving it a second to pause. "It's only a matter of time," muttered the eerily smiling stranger, watching them from the depths of the forest. "It's a skilled assassin called the Demon Delphus. An armored bear isn't going to beat this guy anymore. That speed of development and calmness is amazing. Shuji Mido is special. Delphus only wanted to do a little recon, but now he's going to have to change his plans. He's going to kill that boy right here." Meanwhile, the class headman delivered another slashing blow to the armored bear. After this blow, the monster was finally weakened. His body was completely covered with wounds and was bleeding. "Finish him!" shouted Mido, looking at the exhausted enemy. "Now take that lesson with you to the next world, boy. Things are different in this world, and after killing an opponent, you can never relax." But as soon as the demon Delphus said it out loud, he felt something strange. Someone crept up behind him and put a knife blade to his throat. And that person turned out to be Shinjo Kan, who had sneaked up unnoticed from behind. "Take note, never let your guard down before you kill," the boy advised coldly, using his blessing. In the same second, the knife that the demon held in his hand fell and embedded the blade into the ground. Realizing the hopelessness of his situation, Delphus threw away his weapon and raised his hands. Glancing back at the boy behind him, the man promised to remember his advice. In fact, the demon couldn't believe that this kid had managed to catch him off guard. However, as it was, he couldn't give up that easily. Delphus realized that he had to think of a way to escape, but Shinjo decided not to give his opponent time to think. He slashed the demon's knees in one swift motion. As he fell to the ground, Delphus cried out in pain and marveled at how this guy could wield a knife with such ease and without thought. "Don't yell like that. It'll be too much trouble if Mido and his friends spot us," Shinjo explained as he put his blade to the throat of his opponent, lying on the ground. The guy then promised to let his enemy go if he answered a few questions. Then, turning indignantly round to the boy sitting on him, Delphus asked who he was that the demon should answer his questions. "A shadow from another world," Shinjo explained confidently, looking at his frightened opponent. Realizing something, Delphus gritted his teeth in anger. That creepy aura last night came from that boy. Meanwhile, looking disdainfully at the demon, Shinjo explained that he knew they were being followed. However, there was no way the guy could track Delphus down. That was why the boy had used Mido as bait. That's right, he'd known from the beginning about the demon watching him and his classmates. Shinjo explained to the enemy that they came from another world, and therefore the guy has little information about the structure of this world. He wants the enemy to tell him everything he knows about demons. Nervously glancing at the boy, Delphus asked if he really thought he was going to talk like that. At the same moment, the demon felt a pain piercing to the bone. This pain was so unbearable that the enemy almost fainted. "Honestly, it's more useful for you to tell me everything if you don't want to be in hell on Earth," Shinjo advised, pressing a painful point on his enemy's back with his foot with great force. "Don't underestimate me, kid," the exhausted Delphus muttered in his last breath, looking at the boy with hatred. After saying that, he clenched his jaw with all his might, causing a crunch to be heard. Stunned as he looked at his opponent, the guy immediately realized what he had just done. Beginning to choke, Delphus began to spit out blood. His pupils blurred and the demon screamed in pain. He died without telling the boy anything, not even a few seconds later. Shinjo, pointing his knife at the dead enemy, immediately realized that the man had a suicide poison hidden in his mouth. With a frustrated sigh, the boy noted that they had been quite thorough in their approach. From that moment on, he felt that this Demon King's army would be nothing but trouble. Suddenly, a system beep sounded, and a window popped up in front of the boy's face, alerting him that someone was nearby. "Shinjo, is he dead?" Kanzaki asked, trembling with fear, looking fearfully at the demon's corpse. "Kanzaki," the guy said irritably, turning around to look at the girl. The boy looked thoughtfully at the frightened classmate who had seen the dead demon for a while longer. "Kanzaki, how much have you seen?" Shinjo asked, not taking his wary gaze off her. The frightened girl said that she had seen very little, only how the man had fallen. The guy in turn explained that this dead man was the assassin of the Demon King's army. Moreover, that armored bear is his puppet. The monster that attacked Nagasho and her friends is also his work. After listening to her partner, Kanzaki asked if this demon was really trying to kill them. Shinjo Kang confirmed this, noting that it was obvious that the Demon King's army would send someone to kill the hero candidates. The girl agreed with her boyfriend's inferences, remarking that she was naive. Kanzaki then looked at her comrade and asked how he had noticed the Demon King's assassin. After all, he was the only one who recognized him. Then, looking at his classmate, the boy decided to tell her everything. "In our homeworld, I used to moonlight doing contract killings. That's why I sensed a colleague in the neighborhood," Shinjo-kan explained, looking at the corpse under his feet. Looking at the guy tensely, Kanzaki asked what kind of contract killings he was talking about. Realizing that it didn't sound plausible, the boy told the girl that it was up to her to believe him or not. However, the presence of a corpse lying here is an undeniable fact. Looking seriously at Kanzaki, Shinjo asked her not to tell anyone about what she had seen today. The class is already on edge due to Hashimoto's injury. Looking at the boy excitedly, the girl, stammering a little, promised to keep quiet on the subject. She then remarked that the boy was surprisingly kind. Why be so attentive to the feelings of his classmates? Taking off his hood, Shinjo explained that unlike him, the other classmates were not used to fighting. But the next thing the guy thought of, he didn't bother to tell his partner. He actually acts friendly to gain Kanzaki's trust. Her blessing of control may come in handy for Shinjo in the future. When the two of them returned, all the classmates had already gathered around the badly injured Hashimoto. This girl sitting by a tormented classmate is student number 34, and her name is Hano Shiori. Her blessing is an ordinary healing. Bringing her hand to Hashimoto's wounds and bruises, she healed them with her power in seconds. The rest of the classmates, standing to the side, watched this with genuine amazement. Concerned, Narumi Ryuya ran up to Hano and asked if his partner would be okay. After hearing from the healer that Hashimoto would be completely healthy in an hour, the guy exhaled with relief. After that, he remarked that Mido Shuji was amazing. That bulky thing that attacked them was terrifyingly strong. Pointing at the girls behind him, the class headman agreed, but said that it wasn't difficult to defeat the monster together. Shinju Kang, leaning against a tree nearby, was listening. Closing his eyes, the boy felt an unpleasant sensation. "What are you looking at me for?" Shinjo asked, noticing Kanzaki staring at him. The girl in turn turned away proudly and told him not to take it personally. At that moment, out of nowhere, came the voice of the Archbishop. She said that apparently everyone had already returned. Looking at them indignantly, Narumi asked where they had been missing all this time. Gale explained that he and his mistress were not far from the forest and were doing their job, keeping an eye on the hero candidates. Perplexed by his words, the green-haired boy asked the knight why he hadn't helped at the most dangerous moment. To this, the old man replied that it wouldn't be a workout if he helped the kids every time. Then Mido told Mr. Gale that Hashimoto was in danger and could have died. So why did he just stand by and watch? "In actual battle, anyone's life is in danger of death," replied the knight, looking gravely at the boy. "From now on, this is the only kind of battle that awaits you, so don't whine about something so trivial." However, Mido disagreed with this. They had been tricked after all. Didn't the knight say that this forest only had weak monsters? Stepping into their conversation, Leonora explained that it was most likely the work of a demon assassin. Originally, there had never been armored bears in this forest. It was probably used by demons to assess the strength of candidates. Most likely, the enemy is still hiding somewhere in the forest, and so it wouldn't hurt to beef up security. You should also step up your training, or else everyone will just be killed like insects. Reinforce? Is it really going to be any harder? Weren't the hero candidates already working to the limit? And it turns out they could really be killed at any moment? An indignant Mido shouted to Miss Leonora that this was ridiculous. This is their first real fight. It's obvious that everyone is excited. Even if it's ridiculous, you'll have to go through with it, or else you'll die, replied the Archbishop indifferently. Hearing this, the class headman looked dumbfoundedly at the gray-haired girl. As he came closer, an irritated Arashi said that this was already too much. They summoned him and his classmates to this world, and now they're giving him orders like this? At the same instant, an irritated Gale suddenly appeared in front of the guy with the words, "I'll tell you now so there's no misunderstanding. You're all just pawns of Mrs. Leonora. Don't think you have the right to disobey her!" Such words greatly dumbfounded all the hero candidates. Arashi was furious when he heard such a harsh statement. But when he ran up to Gale to deal with him, Mido Shuji blocked his path with his hand. Looking irritated at the headman, Arashi asked why the hell he was stopping him and telling him to calm down. Mido in turn explained that if they went against Gale and the Archbishop now, they would make an entire state their enemy. They clearly couldn't stand up to that. Nodding, the elderly knight remarked that, as expected, Mido was well aware of the situation. For the state, hero candidates are valuable pawns, and as long as they are obedient, no one will get hurt. Go against an entire country? Arashi suddenly muttered with a smirk. The second he ripped the pin from his sleeve, the guy shouted that he was fine with that option, then pointed his hand at Gale. Such a lunge came as a surprise to the elderly knight, and as soon as he looked at the boy, there was an explosion. This explosion was like a cannon shot. In an instant, the whole field was covered with thick fog and fire. Thinking that his attack had reached its target, Arashi grinned and peered into the smoke. Suddenly, an enraged Gale jumped out of the smoke, immediately attacking the boy. Seeing the face of an elderly knight popping out of the mist, Arashi was stunned. At the same second, a powerful fist punch flew across his face. Gale, who had jumped out of the fog, slammed his fist into the guy's face with great force, sending him flying several meters away. As he fell, Arashi rolled with his back on the ground and briefly lost consciousness. All the classmates watching this fight looked fearfully at the guy. "That's what you're capable of," Gale suddenly said, looking at the stunned children. Turning around and heading towards the exit of the forest together with the Archbishop, the elderly knight advised the hero candidates to get ready. Starting tomorrow, they would have a rigorous training session. When Leonora and her knight left, the classmates ran up to the mangled Arashi. But when they tried to help him, the boy just waved him away. "I'll definitely finish that bastard off," the boy muttered, smiling madly. The day after combat practice, at Mrs. Leonora's orders for today, monster researcher Steady became the head of the candidates' training. After looking around at all the candidates, Steady remembered that someone had been injured yesterday and then asked if everyone had recovered in time. Hashimoto raised her hand and replied that it was her. And thanks to Shiori's healing, everything was finally healed. "And that asshole is fine too," the girl added, pointing her finger at one of her classmates. When he realized he was the one in question, Arashi just nodded and looked away. After listening to Hashimoto, a surprised Steady remarked that it was incredible that healing was among the blessings. After making sure that everyone was gathered, the guy with the glasses decided to explain the training. Pointing his finger at the building behind him, he said that it was his research center. It was there that the candidates would have to fight the monsters today. "In other words, this place is overrun with monsters?" Mido clarified, looking tensely at the researcher. Hearing this question, Steady smiled slyly and adjusted his glasses. He looked at the candidates and said it would be easier if they saw everything with their own eyes. At this, the stone doors behind him opened. When the children went inside, there they saw goblins sitting in cages. In addition to them, the Val lizard was there. There were also huge red ogres sitting in cages. When the children saw all these monsters sitting behind the bars, they were terrified. Walking down the hall with the Archbishop, Steady told him that all of this was his collection of monsters for experimentation. Leonora in turn added that the Steady Research Center is also used as a field training ground for soldiers. For Steady himself, this is very profitable, because based on the battle of the soldiers, he can collect data about different types of monsters and their capabilities. Of course, none of the hero candidates could find the words to answer these two. Then they realized what they were about to experience in the coming days. That's how the second combat practice began. While one of his classmates fought the Red Orc one-on-one, Shinji stood apart from everyone else and watched the fight. His classmates are surprisingly calm for someone who was thrown onto the battlefield without consent. Are they so affected by yesterday's experience? However, there is still fear in their movements. Meanwhile, while Shinji was pondering this, the orc flung Nagase away from him with a wave of his hand. Getting to her feet, the girl got to her feet and looked at her opponent. Then, turning to Nagase, the orc put his sword in front of him and attacked her. With a frightened look at the instructor, Mido shouted that this monster was too dangerous. Steady, in turn, replied that he didn't think so. Mrs. Leonora had specifically asked him to be more strict with the hero candidates. These kids don't seem to fully understand some things. Firstly, a hero candidate who has received divine blessing would never lose to such a weak monster. The main thing is to show a desire to win. All the candidates from the beginning were capable of this kind of thing. The only thing preventing them now is fear and hesitation. Surprised to see Nagase burn the orc to the ground, Mido asked if that was the only problem. Smiling, Steady explained that with an increase in divine blessing level, there was a chance to receive another blessing. I have a favor to ask of you, Mido. Shinji's voice came from down the stairs. The headman turned to look at him and asked, puzzled, what was the matter? With a glance at Mido, Shinji narrated that his evaluation skill had detected another blessing in the guy. In addition to the sword protecting against evil, the headman's stats displayed that he possessed the blessing of a lethal attack on a monster. After verifying this information, Mido turned to the instructor and asked for permission to enter the arena next. Of course, Steady didn't object, reminding him that that's what combat training was for. Soon, when the remains of the burned orc were removed, a new one was brought into the arena, and the class headman sparred with him. Only once he was in the arena did the guy activate the level 2 evil protecting sword. After that, he adopted a fighting stance and activated a deadly attack on the monster. As Mido raised his sword, he noticed something unusual. The monster across from him suddenly began to act as if he were afraid of something. I'm sorry, but there will be no mercy. I'm attacking, the boy said, lashing out at his frightened opponent. In a second, the guy had shortened his distance with the orc, aiming the blade of his sword directly at his mouth. Seeing the blade flying at his face, the monster tried to cover himself with his hand in panic. But that didn't stop the headman, and he cut off his opponent's arm with one swing of his sword. Feeling the incredible pain, the orc roared exhaustedly. At that moment, Mido immediately made another lunge, this time aiming for the monster's neck. The orc's head flew off his shoulders and fell to the ground. Seeing the way their head teacher quickly dispatched the monster, the classmates began to cheer. With this power from now on, even an armored bear wouldn't be much of a problem. This means that with the increase of the evaluation skill level, Shinji would probably receive a new blessing. And if you look at it that way, there's another one among the guy's classmates who has an increased level of blessing. And aside from the explosion reaching the second level, Arashi had the blessing of a mine. Seeing this, Shinji decided not to tell him about it. From what the guy had learned today, he could understand that the power of the blessing could increase. In this world, standard training wouldn't work, and so Shinji needed training too. Late afternoon of the same day, Arashi gathered some classmates in his room to tell them something. After listening to him, Narumi tensely asked the boy if he was serious. Arashi confirmed this and said that the first thing to do was to kill Gale. After that, they would capture Leonora and beat it out of her to find a way to get back to their world. The other classmates supported his idea, shouting that it was time for them to get out of this world. Besides, if they killed Leonora, they wouldn't have to worry about being called up again. Glancing at Narumi, Arashi motioned for him to join them again. He'd had enough of those two's antics too, hadn't he? The green-haired boy looked at him tensely and asked what the chances were that it would work. Arashi replied that with Narumi, the odds would be much better. Narumi gritted his teeth in frustration when he heard that. He couldn't understand why he had to kill someone just to get into his world. But Hashimoto almost died in her first combat practice. If things continue like this, there's a good chance that most of the candidates will die. Okay, I'm in, Narumi said, thinking it over. The next day, the hero candidates continued their rigorous training. As before, Mido stood out the most among them. He had almost completely mastered his new blessing and continued practicing diligently. He was watched by Shinji, who was standing off to the side. What zeal! The boy leaning against a tree remarked, looking thoughtfully at the headman. Turning to Shinji, Mido explained that he was still too weak, so he needed to find a way to get stronger. At that time, the guy standing by the tree swept up that the headman could already defeat more than half of the knights in this country. Looking at his fist, Mido replied that he was still unable to overpower Gale, and he didn't like that. He needs more power. This boy won't be satisfied until he can protect all of his classmates. Without taking his eyes off the headman, Shinji asked what he thought of Leonora. As the training continued, Mido said that they were all just pawns to the archbishop. Gale was hardly lying when he said that no harm would come to the candidates as long as they followed orders. In response, Shinjo reminded him that if Leonora ordered it, all the hero candidates would go to fight the Demon King to the death. That's right, it's already decided, Mido said, giving the boy a serious look. Even though everything has been decided, the headman has already decided that he will be the one to fight the Demon King. The boy will defeat him as a hero of this country, and in exchange, he will try to bargain with Leonora for a better life in this world for all his classmates. After listening to him, Shinjo remarked that the plan was a good one, but Leonora was unlikely to agree to such a thing. With a confident look at his classmate, Mido explained that he was only swinging his sword to gain the archbishop's trust. He would have to give his best today. As soon as the guy said that, someone's footsteps were heard behind him. Leonora and her personal knight came to observe how the training was going. Seeing the two, Steady walked over to them and greeted Madam Archbishop. When the boy approached them, Leonora asked him to keep an eye on the hero candidates while she and Gale were away. Steady, in turn, asked her to rely on him. Hearing this conversation, Nagase asked the archbishop if they were going somewhere. With a smile, Leonora confirmed her guess and explained that she would be away from Gale for a few days. Steady would be the candidate supervisor during that time. After these words, the girl said goodbye to the children and left with her knight. And at that moment, as the two men walked away, Steady gave them a strange look. The guy smiled slyly, then grinned. A few minutes later, as they drove the wagon, Gale asked his mistress if everything was going to be all right. Lowering her head, the girl asked her knight what he meant. Then, as he continued to drive the wagon, the older man frowned and asked Leonora to stop playing dumb. It was obvious that Arashi was up to something. After listening to Gale, the archbishop leisurely sipped some tea. Placing the cup on the saucer, the girl agreed with the knight, saying that it was likely that Arashi would try to rebel against them. Keeping his eyes on the road, Gale asked his mistress how she planned to proceed. Looking out the window, Leonora said she was very curious to see what the child would come up with. Then she suggested that the knight just turn a blind eye for the time being. The older man frowned and replied that he didn't mind, but that the kid was still developing. Arashi, though fiery, is not brainless. He realizes that he can't stand up to Gale alone. There's a good chance that the hero candidates will unite to rebel. Smiling, Leonora told the knight to calm down, explaining that these children could not defeat her. It's just not possible for them. Looking away, Gale agreed with the archbishop. But when he tried to object, Leonora asked if this situation didn't even seem favorable for the two of them. The girl wanted to gradually begin to show these children where they belonged in the world. This uprising will be a great excuse to break their claws. Plus, there's another suspicious person. Should we leave him alone? Late night of the same day. Once outside the fortress, Shinjo found some monster and began his individual training. Running away from the lizard, the guy jumped into the air. On the fly, he turned around and pulled a dagger from behind his back. With a lightning-fast movement, the boy threw the knife at his opponent, driving the blade straight into his skull between his eyes. The monster instantly died from this attack, and Shinji ran away after landing. This monster he was able to kill in 13 seconds. He looked at his hand and activated the evaluation skill. His appraisal skill level had risen to the second level, and so the boy immediately received the new blessing of displaying weaknesses. Shinji was probably able to raise his level so quickly because he had killed that demon earlier. The question now was how to put this new blessing into action. As the boy thought about it, he heard a strange sound behind him. Turning around, the boy saw an enraged ogre preparing to strike with his fist. Of course, Shinji had no trouble dodging his opponent's attack. Jumping back to a safe distance, the guy tried to figure out where the ogre had come from. But the monster decided not to give the boy time to think and immediately pounced on him. Then Shinji took out 3 daggers from his pocket. In one sharp movement, he cold-bloodedly threw all 3 knives at his opponent. However, to his surprise, all the daggers simply bounced off the ogre's skin without inflicting a scratch. This monster was much stronger than Shinji had expected. But even though the enemy is quite strong, it's the perfect opportunity to experiment. In the same second, the guy activated the weakness display skill, causing his eyes to light up with a bright red color. The boy immediately saw the ogre's neck light up from behind. Realizing that this was the right place to strike, Shinji jumped out of his seat in the direction of the enemy. When he was behind the monster, he drew his dagger and held it over his head. With a sharp swing, he plunged the knife blade into the ogre's neck. As a result of this attack, the monster was instantly killed and fell to the ground. The new skill showed Shinji the softest part of the ogre's skin. I see, so that's how weakness mapping works. It's not bad strength, but it's not enough for a boy. He won't last long in this world. Looking at his palm, Shinji resolutely turned it into a fist. I need to get stronger, said the boy. Once he had defeated the ogre, Shinji didn't stop and went on to fight other monsters. Seeing a horde of goblins running at him, the boy activated the weakness display skill. At the same moment, he saw that the weak point of each goblin was the brain and heart. Jumping back, Shinji immediately threw 3 daggers at the monsters. All 3 knives accomplished their goals, instantly finishing off their opponents. As the goblins dropped dead to the ground, the boy headed over to take his daggers out of them. The fact that their weaknesses were the brain and heart was obvious enough. Against these monsters, the new skill is quite useless. Taking the knives out of the goblins, Shinji decided to look for monsters of another species to test this blessing on them. At the same second, he heard someone approaching. There's a man coming this way. After a while, a concerned Kanzaki came out to the boy with a flashlight. Glancing at her, Shinji asked what she was doing here in the middle of the night. The girl told him that she'd been all over the dormitory looking for Shinji. When she couldn't find him, she decided to check the forest just in case. Sighing, the boy explained to his classmate that it was dangerous to be in the forest at night. Then he asked her to hurry back to the dormitory, but Kanzaki objected, noting that she should be the one to tell him. Shinji explained that he was used to the restrictions of the night, but his classmate was not. It's not easy to fight monsters in the pitch dark. Looking at the guy unhappily, the girl asked him to stop, then asked him what he was doing here in the first place. Experimenting with a new blessing, the boy explained, giving her a serious look. Without taking her eyes off Shinji, Kanzaki asked what the new blessing was. In response, the boy asked a classmate if he remembered Steady's words. By increasing the level of blessing, hero candidates can receive other blessings as well. Puzzled, Kanzaki asked the boy what kind of blessing he had received. However, Shinji only turned away and replied that he saw no point in telling her that. Then Kanzaki got angry and said that she was worried for nothing and came here. Worried? You? About me? Shinji clarified in surprise as he looked at the girl. Realizing what she had just said, Kanzaki blushed and shrieked that she didn't mean it. Shinji turned around and asked his classmate to go back to the dormitory. He was going to stay here for a while and experiment. But the girl refused to leave and decided to stay with the boy. At that moment, she smelled a strange odor. Dazedly pointing her finger to where she had just come from, Kanzaki asked what was going on. Smoke could be seen behind the trees and the smell of fire could be smelled. The hero candidate's dormitory was tried by bright flames. The building was attacked by monsters and set on fire. Fortunately, all the candidates managed to run out of the building before it was completely consumed by fire. But the main problem wasn't the fire, but the huge number of strong monsters that surrounded the dormitory. Hashimoto, like the rest of her classmates, managed to run out of the building. Suddenly, a huge red ogre blocked her path, raising its club above its head with a terrifying roar. The very next second, there was the sound of a sword cutting through flesh. When Milo comes to her classmate's aid, she finishes off the monster that attacked her with a single swing of her blade. Hugging the frightened girl, the guy asked if she was okay. Looking at him dazedly, Hashimoto said she was fine, then thanked the boy. While the two of them were chatting, a horde of armed goblins had already approached them. Shit! There's no end to them! Mido shouted tensely as he held his sword out in front of him. In the same instant, all the monsters in front of him were burned to the ground. I slept so well? What the hell is going on? Where did the orcs come from? Nagase said indignantly as she continued to burn her opponents with her flames. Approaching her, Arashi said that now was not the time to ask questions. The first thing to do was to get rid of those monsters. Meanwhile, the fire had already almost completely consumed the roof of the dormitory. Just upon noticing the fire, Shinji and Kanzaki immediately rushed to the aid of their classmates. After running up to the burning dormitory, the two realized that the battle with the monsters was apparently in full swing. Thank God you're here! Good thing no one was hurt, Narumi said with relief as he saw his classmates running up. Shinji approached the green-haired boy and explained that he and Kanzaki had gone for a short walk. He then asked his classmate what the hell was going on. Narumi replied that he didn't know what was going on. He had just escaped from the fire and had run into a horde of monsters. Then Shinji noticed that what was happening here looked more like human methods. There must be a puppeteer around here somewhere. We have to track him down and catch him. Good thinking, hero candidate, a familiar voice suddenly sounded. On the wall nearby sat Steady, smiling slyly. Seeing him, Shinji realized where this horde of monsters had come from. If Steady was behind it, it made sense. They're all his monsters from the research center. Yep, those are my cute samples, Stady confirmed, smiling back at the guy. He had to enhance his monsters with drugs to make them suitable for his plan. Angry, Shinji asked the researcher what his purpose was. Why would he benefit from killing hero candidates? In response, Steady said that he had received orders from above to destroy the hero candidates, even at the cost of his own position. He holds no personal grudge against the kids, but they'll have to die anyway. When Kanzaki heard this, she asked, dumbfounded, what order from above was being discussed. Was this really Leonora's plan? Getting to his feet, Steady explained to the girl that she was wrong. That fox had nothing to do with it. In fact, the Demon King himself had ordered it. When the researcher said this, Narumi shrieked, wondering if he was a spy for the Demon King's army. Steady confirmed it immediately. If he succeeded in this assignment, he would be allowed to continue his research. With a hateful glance at his opponent, Shinji wondered if he had gotten so caught up in his monster research that he was rotten to the bone. But in response to these words, Steady only smiled and adjusted his glasses. I won't be able to know the whole mysterious essence of monsters as long as I remain human, shouted the researcher madly, waving his hands contentedly. Meanwhile, the fierce battle between the hero candidates and the monsters continued. Standing with his arms spread apart on the fortress wall, Steady beckoned to several of his charges. Looking at the children below, he smiled and ordered the monsters to attack them. Then, the ogres and goblins behind him pounced on the hero candidates. Without taking his eyes off his opponents, Shinji shouted Kanzaki's name. The girl immediately understood what was required of her and used her blessing on her enemies. In the same instant, all the monsters froze in place, losing the ability to move. With her hand pointing at the blonde-haired guy standing on the wall, Kanzaki ordered the monsters to attack him. Pathetic attempt, Steady muttered with a smirk on his face. Immediately after those words, Kanzaki's control fell off the monsters, giving them back their minds. Seeing this, the dumbfounded girl asked how this was possible. Then Steady reminded her that he'd been researching monsters for years. He'd always have a way to tame them if they got violent. After explaining this, the guy ordered his underlings to tear these kids to shreds. Taking the dagger out from behind his sinus, Shinji squatted down and motioned for Kanzaki to duck. At the same moment, the blade of his knife slit the neck of the goblin who had pounced on the girl. In a few lightning-fast spurts, the boy finished off 3 of his opponents by slashing their throats with his blade. As he looked at all this, Steady began to laugh madly, wanting to see the continuation of this incredible spectacle. At the same instant, more monsters pounced on Shinji, ready to tear him to pieces. But the guy wasn't deterred by that, and he immediately sprang from his seat to meet them. With a stroke of his knife, he finished off the goblin closest to him. The boy then made a sharp lunge and plunged the dagger of the lizard that attacked him into the skull. But suddenly he heard the roar of an ogre behind him. Keeping his cool, Shinji pulled the dagger from the monster he had just killed and kicked his opponent in the face. From such a powerful blow, the ogre flew off the guy and fell to the ground unconscious. Realizing that this monster would not rise again, Shinji adopted a fighting stance and looked at the remaining opponents with concentration. Of course, after seeing the way this boy dealt with their comrades, the other monsters looked at him in horror, not wanting to fight anymore. What's the matter with you? This guy doesn't even have a useful blessing, Stady shouted angrily, glaring at his charges. Hearing that panicked cry, Shinji looked at the blonde-haired guy standing on the wall of the fortress. In the same second, he activated his evaluation skill to finally find out what their current main enemy was capable of. Name: Stady Akheim. Age 28 years old. All the characteristics were F rank, but his status said that this guy isn't really human. He's a half-demon. But the most interesting part is that Steady has a level 1 slave sorcery skill. I can see why it was so easy for him to override Kanzaki's control. It's because the monsters were given higher level orders. As Steady said, powerful demons can control monsters, and to do so, they use a technique called slave sorcery. Damn, I didn't want to use it, but it can't be helped, the explorer said tensely, raising a hand to his face. After saying those words, he whistled loudly as if calling out to someone. Looking at him tensely, Shinji asked what he was up to. With a smile, Steady told the boy that he would soon understand. Then Shinji decided not to wait for his opponent to execute his plan, and leapt from his seat to finish him off. But at the same moment, he stopped when he saw a huge ball of flame in front of him. The boy immediately jumped aside, and the fiery projectile exploded with a rumble in the place where he had recently been standing. Jumping back to a safe distance, the boy sat down on his knees, covering himself with his dagger. When Shinji looked up to see where that fireball had come from, he saw something terrifying. A huge fire dragon was flying in the sky above the fortress walls. As soon as the guy spotted him, the beast roared deafeningly. Laughing, Steady stretched his arm forward and explained to the hero candidates that his best trump card, the red dragon, was now flying in front of them. The red dragon in turn looked at the three seniors standing below. At the same instant, he swung his tail around. The animal blew off a piece of a nearby building and hurled the debris at its enemies. This attack was so lightning fast that it was almost impossible to react to it. With a startled glance at the debris of the building flying at her face, Kanzaki realized that she wouldn't be able to dodge in time. Suddenly, Shinjo grabbed her tightly and saved her from the debris that landed on the ground. Without taking his eyes off the dragon, the boy asked his classmate if she was okay. The girl looked at him dumbfounded in response. Shinji asked Narumi if he was all right without waiting for her to answer. The green-haired boy replied that he had miraculously survived. Shinji explained that the next attack was coming soon, so Narumi should take Kanzaki and get out of here. At the same moment, the dragon raised its wings and roared deafeningly. "Come on, come here!" Shinji shrieked, left alone with his opponent. Then he activated his blessing of identifying weaknesses. The guy immediately saw the dragon's weak spot in the throat area. Spreading out, the boy swung his dagger and attempted to slit the monster's neck. But all his efforts were in vain. The boy's dagger shattered as soon as it made contact with the enemy's skin. Running past the dragon, Shinji stopped and looked back at his enemy. Even though the throat is the red dragon's weak point, it is still too strong. With the strength that Shinji has now, it's impossible to even scratch this monster. This is the worst possible situation. What's the next step? As soon as Shinji thought about it, Arashi's satisfied voice was heard nearby. "What do we have here? It's just the right size for me." After saying that, the guy jumped down from the roof of the building and activated the explosion skill to strike the dragon. Bouncing off the monster's knee, Arashi landed successfully on the ground. Turning around, he laughed and contentedly asked the lizard how he felt about this. But at the same moment, the boy saw a swift stream of flame flying at his face. Covering himself with his hands, the guy tried to block the red dragon's attack. But even though he was not badly injured, his clothes were still on fire. So, falling to the ground, Arashi rolled around on the ground to put out the flames. As the guy sat down on his knees, Shinji, standing nearby, sighed and said that with an opponent like that, he shouldn't have relaxed. But with Arashi's punching power, it could work. Putting his hand behind his sinus, Shinji told his classmate to listen to him carefully. If the two of them join forces, together they can defeat the red dragon. Hearing this, Arashi irritably asked his classmate what use he was to him. Shinjo in turn explained that he knows the dragon's weaknesses, but his strength is not enough to hit his opponent. Grinning, Arashi asked the guy what made him think he was going to help him. Arashi has no intention of teaming up with the little brat. "It's coming back," tensely muttered Shinjo, not paying attention to his classmate's words. At the same moment, the red dragon struck with its tail with a U-turn. Both guys managed to dodge the attack by making a leap. But suddenly, the dragon raised its head and flames began to concentrate in its throat. Landing on his knee after dodging a surprise blow, Arashi immediately realized what his opponent was about to do. Looking at the boy, the monster released a scalding stream of flame at him. Arashi tried to block the attack with his hands, however, he still received severe burns. Rising to his feet, the lad took hold of his arm and looked tensely at his enemy. "If you're so sure you can kill him alone, go ahead," Shinjo muttered, not taking his eyes off the dragon. Realizing that he had no other choice, Arashi asked his classmate where to kill them. "Where is the monster's weak spot?" Then, Shinjo told him that the red dragon had an inverted scale on its throat. That's his weakness. The boy's plan is that he will distract the monster, and Arashi will hit that scale with a blast. When Shinjo asked his classmate if he could do the task, Arashi only slapped his fist into his palm and said he could do it. "What are you waiting there for?" Suddenly came the voice of Steady, standing on the fortress wall behind. "Red dragon, kill them now!" Hearing its master's order, the monster roared deafeningly. After that, he flapped his wings powerfully, sending a scalding stream of wind into the two guys. It was very hard to resist such a flow, which annoyed Arashi greatly. Stopping flapping its wings, the dragon opened its mouth to try and devour Shinjo. But the boy dodged and, with a sharp swing of his arm, threw two daggers at his opponent. Of course, these knives didn't even scratch the sturdy scales of the red dragon. However, Shinjo's goal was only to distract the monster. Rushing to run away, the guy called the red dragon after him. His plan worked, and the enemy immediately rushed to catch up with the boy. Opening its jaws, the red dragon tried to grab the guy again. Dodging the enemy's attack, Shinjo ran in the other direction. After running away from the monster a safe distance, the guy turned around and stopped. He then immediately commanded Arashi to attack the dragon, who was not paying any attention to him at all at this time. Obediently, Arashi did a roll-up and found himself under the monster's neck. There he saw the very weak spot that Shinjo had recently told him about. Raising his hand up, the boy activated the blast skill and pounded his fist straight into the overgrown lizard's weak spot. Feeling the tearing pain, the red dragon roared loudly. A moment later, the huge carcass of the animal fell dead to the ground. Seeing this, a dumbfounded Steady couldn't understand how this could have happened. Grinning, Arashi placed his foot on the dead dragon's muzzle and took stock of what a lowlife it was. Sighing, Shinjo asked his classmate how he could say such a thing, despite the fact that he could barely stand on his feet. Turning around to look at him, Arashi irritably asked the boy to shut up. Looking at the demon minion standing on the fortress wall, Shinjo wondered what he would do without his trump card. Then Steady replied that that wasn't all, because he still had a lot of monsters left. However, after glancing at the battlefield, the blonde-haired guy noticed that all of his wards had been killed. The monsters he had summoned to massacre the hero candidates lay dead on the ground. Brushing the blood off his sword, Mido approached and informed Shinjo that he and his classmates had already dealt with the other monsters. With the others walking up to the wall where their main enemy stood, the class headman looked at the demon minion with determination. Realizing he had lost, Steady decided to get the hell out of here while there was still time. But Narumi flying up to him blocked the blonde-haired boy's escape route and told him he couldn't escape. Taking a step backward, a startled Steady's foot snapped off the edge. Slipping off the fortress wall, the demon minion flew down, losing all hope of escape. As he was suddenly just centimeters away from death, he successfully landed in the water sphere. Not realizing why he was still alive, Steady dived out of the water to get a breath of air. In the same instant, he saw the sharp blade of a dagger in front of his eyes. "You attacked us in the middle of the night, but you delayed the battle too long. I have tons of questions for you," Shinjo said grimly, holding his dagger right in front of his opponent's face. Then Steady asked the boy to wait a while and promised to tell everything in exchange for mercy. Suddenly, the explorers fell silent and his face turned green. From what they saw next, the upperclassmen stared dumbfoundedly at Steady for a while longer. So while in the water sphere, the demon minion died for unknown reasons. Looking at his classmate, Mido asked what had happened. Shinjo in turn replied that Steady had died, most likely due to some sort of curse technique. He then explained that he had found information about it while he was digging through the library archives. After listening to the boy, the head of the class realized that Steady had been killed by the curse because he was willing to share the information with his enemies. It looks like the threat from the Demon King's army towards the hero candidates will only grow. The day after the Steady incident, Leonora and her knight had already returned back to the fortress, and they were immediately informed of what had happened. Grinning, the archbishop couldn't immediately believe that such a thing had happened in her absence. Then, Narumi reminded the girl that she was the one who had entrusted them to Steady. Did she have no idea who her ward really was? Leonora only smirked in response. Apologizing to the hero candidates, the girl said there must have been a misunderstanding. With that, she wanted to say that she didn't expect a Steady-level monster lord to do so much damage. Hearing this, the candidates looked at the archbishop perplexed. Glancing angrily at Leonora, Nagasho asked why she hadn't done anything, even though she knew who Steady was from the beginning. The archbishop in turn reminded us that she was going to tighten up the training of the candidates. This is just the beginning. Unable to bear the outrage, one of the children shouted that they had almost died. Steady set fire to the dormitory, while most were asleep. With a disdainful look at him, Gale told the kid not to whine. "You can't let your guard down, even at night, or you'll die instantly." Such ruthless words alerted all the hero candidates and made their real situation clear. Even Shinjo couldn't spot this horde of monsters in time, and to ask such a thing from an ordinary school children is truly insane. While Shinjo was thinking about it, Leonora decided to move on to the main topic. "I am pleased to inform you that you will soon be traveling to the capital," said the woman, looking at the candidates. Perplexed by what he heard, Mido asked the archbishop why they needed to go there. Leonora explained that the hero candidates were the hottest topic in the kingdom right now. The citizens of the capital would hold a parade in their honor. The people will enjoy seeing the celebrants live. A few hours later, night of the same day. Sitting on his horse, Gale told the soldiers that they should stop there today. Now they should spend the night and be on their way again at dawn. Soon the convoy set up tents and lit fires. Sitting by the fire, Arashi estimated that there were about 30 people in total. After saying that, he took a piece of meat in his hand and took a bite of it. Sitting next to him, one of his classmates asked the boy what he was talking about. Looking away, Arashi explained that he was referring to the guards that were assigned to the hero candidates. There is no one serious among these people, but there are more than 30 of them. The classmate agreed that there were indeed many guards, but Arashi was capable of taking them all down in one blow. When the boy asked what he was up to, Arashi asked him to turn his head on. This is a great chance to carry out their plan. Tensely looking at the boy, one of the classmates agreed with this. Usually, there are a lot more soldiers around the candidates, but here there are only 30 of them. Of course, that's still quite a few, but these ones are much weaker than the hero candidates. Taking an irritated bite of another piece of meat, Arashi can't believe that the freaking archbishop and her knight don't put them down for anything. They are so unconcerned that they don't even think the kids would dare to riot. Which is why today is the best time to get the hell out of this damn world. Shinjo, standing on the other side of the tent, was eavesdropping on this conversation. Arashi is indeed right. Not many soldiers have been submitted to the candidates today, and all of them are weak. But the reason is simply because Leonora and Gale are confident in their own abilities. It's not known exactly what they're capable of right now, so Shinjo needs more time to understand these two. Walking up to the head of the class, the boy called out to him. With a serious look at Mido, the boy asked for a moment of his time. After a while, most of the hero candidates and soldiers dispersed to their tents. The silhouettes of several people can be seen in the trees of the nearby forest. Arashi and the troop he had assembled were already ready to put their plan into action. All the soldiers, except the sentinels, had fallen asleep, and so it was the perfect time to launch an attack. "Stay where you are, Arashi!" Suddenly came the voice of the class headman who approached. Seeing Mido with the other classmates behind him, Arashi's squad was stunned with surprise. Approaching Arashi, the head of the class said that he had heard that the kid was planning to kill Leonora and all the soldiers. Looking at him tensely, Arashi asked Mido how he knew that. The headman in turn explained that he had overheard it by chance when he passed the tent in which the conspirators were sitting. Walking up to them, Nagasho asked her classmates if they were serious about killing the archbishop and her knight. The girl is also pissed off at those two, but this is getting kind of crazy. Angry, Arashi asked the indignant classmates if they were going to be on this broad's leash much longer. Waving his hands, Mido told the boy that he understood his feelings perfectly well, but killing was not the answer. There had to be another way. Arashi then asked the headman if he had any plan. Mido looked confidently at his classmate and told him that his plan was to become Leonora's pawn and defeat the Demon King. In return, he would ask her to provide safety and lodging for the others. Irritated, Arashi looked at the boy and asked if he thought the archbishop would just go along with it. The class headman is equally sure that if he gets stronger, Leonora will have to listen to him. Taking his gaze away, Arashi said that even if the boy succeeded in his plan, he didn't need anyone's protection. Then he told Mido to get out of here and stay out of his way. "Since you're so serious, we'll have to stop you," Mido said, looking at his classmate. Of course, Arashi didn't like the fact that someone was getting in his way, and so the guy immediately prepared for a fight. Asking the headman not to complain later, the guy snapped out of his seat and attacked him. In a matter of seconds, the irritated boy shortened his distance from his opponent and kicked him with all his might. With his hands blocking the blow, Mido slid a few meters on his feet and extinguished the momentum. Looking at his trembling hands, the headman realized that his classmate possessed incredible speed in addition to tremendous strength. Arashi, in turn, looking perplexed at the guy, couldn't understand how the bastard was able to block his punch. "What are you doing there?" the guards suddenly shouted as they approached. Tensely looking at the headman, Arashi immediately realized that this boy was about to turn him in. But contrary to his expectations, Mido simply apologized to the guards and explained that it was just an ordinary little quarrel. Turning around, the soldiers reminded the hero candidates to get up at dawn tomorrow, then asked them to go to bed. When the guards were gone, Arashi looked at the headman and tisked unhappily. "Boring," the boy briefly muttered, turning around. "Your softness, Mido, is getting annoying." Holy Kingdom of Digrest capital. The joyful voices of the townspeople are heard in the streets of the city, heralding the imminent start of the festivities. Walking through the streets of the capital city, Narumi marveled at the grandeur of the place. Hashimoto, on the other hand, was annoyed that there were too many people on here. Fixing her hair, Nagasho remarked that it was still not as bad here as it was in Tokyo. But there were indeed a lot of people gathered around the hero candidates walking through the city center. Just when they saw the candidates entering the town, the locals looked at them in surprise and started crowding around them. Gale, in turn, did not remain silent and demanded the townspeople to disperse, shouting that Saint Leonora, their group of hero candidates, were coming. When the people heard this, they began to praise those chosen by God himself. As they continued walking down the street, the high school students never stopped looking around in surprise at the people standing around them. The people of the capital were indeed greatly pleased to see them and made a real feast. Deciding to support the citizens, Mido, who was walking in front, majestically raised his hand upward, showing his confidence with this movement. Seeing this, Arashi looked irritatedly at the class headman. Looking around, Shinjo noted that apparently Leonora hadn't lied to them when she said the townspeople were hoping for hero candidates, and that makes it kinda creepy. A few hours later, the main palace of the capital of the Kingdom of Digrest. There, the candidates for heroes were greeted by the Holy Knight Rhines. With a hand on his chest, the man suggested that the first thing the guests should do was to rest properly. When they got to their rooms, the seniors happily laid down on the soft beds. It was unbearable for them to sleep on the ground. Meanwhile, all the girls were already relaxing at the hot springs. After a while, dinner was already ready, and all the candidates went together to eat the delicious food. After dinner, Mido continued his diligent training to get stronger as quickly as possible. Shinjo, for his part, stood at the window of one of the castle towers and gazed thoughtfully at the capital. First and foremost, the guy decided to gather information. Going down below, the boy saw the closed high doors, beside which stood 2 guards with spears. Then he saw a few more soldiers patrolling the castle. The guards are innumerable. As expected, moving around the castle would be very risky. Walking over to the window, Shinjo looked outside again. There he saw that sacred knight who had recently met and escorted the hero candidates. He went downstairs and hid behind a tree, eavesdropping on the conversation between Rains and the guards. The Holy Knight told the soldiers that the hero candidates were probably resting in the guest rooms right now. Looking at the man in surprise, the guard asked him if the candidates had really been chosen by the Creator God. After a moment's thought, Rains said that these children had powers that ordinary children should not have, so it must be true. Then, the soldier asked the Holy Knight if he was worried about the possibility of the Demon King's believers taking action. Inviting the hero candidates to the capital could provoke them. The second guard agreed with his partner. The Demon King's believers had been seen acting suspiciously lately. The palace guards should be as careful as possible now. Listening to this conversation, Shinjo wondered which believers in the Demon King they were talking about. Meanwhile, Night Rains reminded the guards that the hero candidates are here now, and so this is yet another reason not to worry about these believers. Turning around, the man reminded them that training would begin soon. After these words, he called the soldiers to follow him. This conversation greatly interested Shinjo, and so he decided to go to town to find out more. When darkness fell, the lad went to the capital's tavern. Like all taverns in the Middle Ages, it was crowded and quite noisy. "Bartender, pour me a glass of ale," said the mysterious man, placing a gold coin on the counter. Dressed in a black cloak so as not to draw too much attention to himself, Shinjo decided to visit a tavern, because that was the kind of place where you could often hear interesting information. Standing at the counter, he overheard a drunkard complaining to his friend that the hero candidates were incredibly skinny. The man sitting next to him asked his friend to be quiet and reminded him that these children had been approved by the saint herself. If the church found out what this guy was saying, he'd be in trouble. From this conversation, Shinjo realized that the church has great influence in this country. People fear it more than they fear the king or the aristocrats. At that moment, the bartender brought the boy a mug of ale and set it on the counter with a clatter. Leaning on the bar, the guy told the man that he was a wandering traveler and knew little about local traditions. Then he asked the bartender for permission to ask him a few questions. When the man agreed, Shinjo said he had heard of some believers in the Demon King. He wondered who they were. Scratching his ear, the bartender asked the boy if he knew that this country was now at war with the army of the Demon King. The Demon King, ruling his army, seems to many people an all-powerful monster. And so there are those among the people who admire and worship his power. These sectarians are rampant all over the country. Recently, they even blew up several aristocratic houses. After listening to the bartender, Shinjo remarks that this sounds like a serious problem. It turns out that these believers in the Demon King are some kind of terrorists. Thanking the bartender, the guy left the tavern and headed back to the palace. All the people living here believe that only hero candidates are capable of defeating the Demon King. The believers hiding in the capital may soon spring into action. That's what everyone is so excited about. While Shinjo was pondering this, a worried Kanzaki ran out towards him. Running up to the guy, indignantly the girl said that she had been looking for him for a very long time. Where would he be all this time? Turning away, the boy explained that he didn't know anything about the capital, and neither did his classmates. So he decided that it would not be superfluous to gather information about this place. Angry, Kanzaki replied that she understood that, but you can't act alone. It could be dangerous. If you ask, I'm always ready to help you, the girl added, looking away embarrassed. But Shinjo only turned around and, asking the girl to go back to her classmates, said he could handle it alone. And when Kanzaki asked him to stop acting like that and told him she was willing to help him, the guy stopped and sighed, noting that he could really use her help with something. He needed to gather as much information as possible, so the boy asked his classmate if she could ask around the townspeople. When he heard that, the girl was happy and agreed to help. Turning around, a joyful Kanzaki, huffing and humming some kind of song, went to run the errand. At that instant, a hooded man walked past her. Looking at the girl, the cloaked stranger smiled grimly. Back at the palace, Shinjo climbed up the wall and opened the window leading to his room. In the end, he learned nothing useful. In any case, what he'd learned about his new enemy was enough. After thinking it over, the guy took off his cloak and threw it on the bed. At the same moment, he heard strange noises coming from outside the door. Walking to the door, the boy threw his cloak over himself again and tried to figure out what that noise was in the middle of the night. Without realizing it, the boy left his room and headed for the main hall. Shinjo asked what was going on when he saw the excited classmates. One of his classmates turned to him and told him that they couldn't find Kanzaki anywhere. Motono, who shares a room with her, noticed that she hadn't returned. They decided to start looking for Kanzaki. Shinjo sighed heavily, realizing that he'd been gone for a long time too, but no one even turned a deaf ear. On the other hand, he lived alone, so his classmates might not have noticed. Seeing Shinjo, Mido asked him if he knew anything. Shaking his head, the guy replied that he had no idea and had been sleeping in his room the whole time. Hearing such an answer, the class headman hesitated. Mido turned to the rest of his classmates and pointed out that Kanzaki was definitely not in the castle, since they had already searched everything. It would be dark soon, so it would be better to look for her outside. Taking her gaze away, Nagasho grudgingly said that Kanzaki could do without them. In fact, it's already deep night outside. All the city people have been asleep for a long time, and so a walk around the city might not end well. After a while, after discussing everything in more detail, the seniors went to look for their partner. Without hesitation, Shinjo went straight to the place where he had last met Kanzaki. Looking around the area, the guy realized it was definitely here. At the same moment, he noticed a piece of paper lying on the ground nearby. Picking up the strange object, the boy noticed that it was a Kanzaki student card. At the same instant, Shinjo felt someone's presence. Suddenly, people in red cloaks and with swords jumped out from everywhere and immediately attacked the guy. Grabbing a dagger from behind his back, Shinjo deflected a blow from one of his opponents by going behind his back. At the same second, he sensed approaching danger from his back. Turning around, the boy grabbed one of the attacker's attacking arm. Then he lowered his opponent's arm and yanked it toward him. Thus, Shinjo stabbed a man running up from behind with the sword his enemy held in his hand. Enraged, the assailant took the blade out of his partner's corpse and pounced on the guy with furious screams. Then, Shinjo swung around and kicked the man's cheek with tremendous force. From such a blow, the opponent could not stand on his feet and fell to the ground with his face. But when he tried to get up, he immediately felt unbearable pain. Stepping on the man's head with his foot, Shinjo broke his neck. Turning around on the last enemy, the lad took note that all of the attackers were only amateurs, both in sword-wielding and in their ability to conceal themselves. They're only the simplest of people, but what did they accomplish? After asking this to the last enemy, the boy gave him a creepy look. "You're going to tell me everything," Shinjo angrily muttered, activating his skill. Meanwhile, somewhere in the dark basement of a house in the capital, trying to free herself from her shackles, a battered Kanzaki stands bound in chains, unable to move. Weary of pain, the girl looked at her captors with hatred. Seeing this look, the two men in red cloaks laughed mockingly. In response, Kanzaki shouted back to her captors that her answer would be the same, no matter how much they questioned her. There was no way she was going to tell them anything. However, the kidnappers were not satisfied with this view. They explained to the girl that they only needed to know a little about the hero candidates. As he approached the hostage, one of the strangers held out his hand to her. Grabbing Kanzaki by her clothes, the man abruptly ripped the fabric off her in the chest area. Laughing at the embarrassed girl, the kidnapper decided to see how long she could keep her mouth shut. But as the man began to reach for the exhausted girl again, Shinjo had already approached and hid behind a pillar nearby. These kidnappers are just two amateurs. The guy has little faith that they were able to capture Kanzaki on their own. After a bit of thought, the boy took knives out of his pockets and threw them at his opponents. The dagger blades plunged into the kidnappers' heads at the same second. Instantly dead, the two cloaked men collapsed to the floor in front of the terrified Kanzaki. The girl stared for a while longer at the corpses of the strangers lying beneath her feet. "Are you okay?" A familiar voice suddenly sounded. Stepping out from behind the pillar, Shinjo began to look around to make sure no one else was left. When the girl, upon seeing him, tried to apologize for getting caught so easily, the guy asked for details after they got out of here. After a while, Shinjo untied his classmate. Just as suddenly, he felt someone's presence again. Only this time the aura was more sinister than that of those amateurs. Rising to his feet, the boy walked over to Kanzaki and looked in the direction from which he had sensed the unknown man. At the same moment, a man wearing a blue cloak and wielding a one-handed sword jumped out of nowhere at the two of them. Within seconds of closing in on his target, the stranger swung his sword and shattered the stone floor beneath him to pieces. Reacting to his opponent's lunge, Shinjo grabbed his classmate in his arms and jumped back to a safe distance. "Dodged my sword," said the attacker in a rather familiar voice. Raising his sword, the blonde-haired man was once again convinced that hero candidates should not be left alive. Seeing the enemy's face, Shinjo immediately realized who it was. This person is Holy Knight Reigns, or rather it would be more accurate to say, head of the Demon King's church. Holding his dagger out in front of him, Shinjo surmised that this country wouldn't have long to live, since the enemy had gotten so close to the top. Holy Knight Reigns proper is going to bring the day of destruction closer by killing all the hero candidates.
Pet the cat.